The last time I was here, I went the Margaret Thosby show, and I picked a piece of music, and it was in Gaelic, it was in Irish, it was a song called Dún Logue, and we played it. And at the end of the program, it was a phone call, and the producer just said, "Look, there's a man who wants to talk to you for a second." And look, it isn't a phone-in show, so it wasn't sort of like that. But he just wants to talk to you for a second. So this man said, "Look, I've stopped my car on a bridge. I'm somewhere in Western Australia, and my mother sang that song, but I never knew what it meant or anything about it. I haven't heard it since I was a child, but I've just heard it on the radio now." So in other words, this woman had come all the way from Ireland with this song, which she sang to her son when he was a baby and a child, and then stopped singing it, and then he never heard it again. So it's just a sort of interesting idea about how that business of music makes its way across oceans. This is Christmas Day. By the time they were removing the trifle dishes, the hall was a mass of smoke and animated talk. Men sat in groups with one or two standing behind them. Others moved from group to group, some with bottles of whiskey in brown paper bags that they passed around. When all the cleaning of the kitchen and the filling of garbage cans had been completed, Father Flood suggested that they go into the hall and join the men for a drink. After a while, Eilish noticed that two men had taken out fiddles and another a small accordion. They'd found a corner and were playing as a few others stood around and listened. Father Flood was moving about the hall with a notebook now, writing down names and addresses and nodding as old men spoke to him. After a while, he'd clapped his hands and called for silence, but it took a few minutes before he could get everyone's attention. "I don't want to interrupt the proceedings," he said, "but we'd like to thank a nice girl from Enniscorthy and two nice women from Arklow for their hard day's work." There was a round of applause. "And as a way of thanking them, there's one great singer in this hall. We're delighted to see him this year again." He pointed to the man whom Eilish had mistaken for her father. He was sitting away from Eilish and Father Flood, but he stood up when his name was called and walked quietly towards them. He stood with his back to the wall so that everyone could see him. When Eilish looked up, the man was signalling to her. He wanted her, it seemed, to come and stand with him. It struck her for a second that he might want her to sing, so she shook her head, but he kept beckoning, and people began to turn and look at her. She felt she had no choice but to leave her seat and approach him. She could not think why he wanted her. He did not greet her or acknowledge her arrival, but closed his eyes and reached his hand towards hers and held it. The skin on the palm of his hand was soft. He gripped her hand tightly and began to move it in a faint circular motion as he started to sing. His voice was loud and strong and nasal. He pronounced each word carefully and slowly, building up a wildness, a ferocity in the way he treated the melody. It was only when he came to the chorus, however, that she understood the words. And he glanced at her proudly, almost possessively, as he sang these lines. All the people in the hall watched him silently. There were 5 or 6 verses. He sang the words out with pure innocence and charm, so that at times when he closed his eyes, leaning his large frame against the wall, he did not seem like an old man. The strength of his voice and the confidence of his performance had taken over. And then each time he came to the chorus, he looked at her, letting the melody become sweeter by slowing down the pace, putting his head down then, managing to suggest even more that he had not merely learned the song, but that he meant it. Eilish knew how sorry this man was going to be, and how sorry she would be when the song had ended, when the last chorus had to be sung and the singer would have to bow to the crowd and go back to his place and give way to another singer, as Eilish too went back and sat in her chair.